Now we will create a small quiz application from scratch. I want to show you here how we can implement two important hooks, the useReducer and the useContext hooks. Most of the time we can manage our state using only the useState hook, but in some cases the combination of useReducer and useContext can be very helpful to manage complex state cases. So for this application we will have three questions basically, and 4 different answers for each question based on the data that we pass. It will be basically a JSON or an object, an array of objects. In this case we only have 3 questions and 4 different answers for this question. I can basically click on any of these options, and so once I confirm that it looks correct to me, I can click confirm and continue, and do the same for the next one. And at the end we should see our results page where we can see if we basically answer right or wrong the question. And in the last page, in the last screen, we should have a restart button so we can start again. And that's basically it, so let's get started. Okay, so let's generate some boilerplate code with the create React app. So let's type create React app and we will call this quiz. Hit enter and wait for this tool to do his thing. And once this is done, we can cd into the folder and type npm star or yarn if you want to use yarn, and we should see the default page generated by the tool. So now let's open the App.js file in our editor. Okay, so we can clean up this file, this code. We don't need this logo. We don't need this code here. And I like to rename this to container. And the first component I would like to create is the progress component. This is the one that says how many questions we have done. So in this case we'll have a total will be 3, and the current question, this will be also a number. Current question will be, let's say, 1. And now let's create the file, the component. So let's create a new folder and a new file here. This will be called components, and here progress.js. Let's open that file. Let's generate some boilerplate code. This component will be called progress. We don't need this useState here. We want to pass some props to this component, and we also need some tag here. There's 2 tag. We will show question 1 or 2 of the total. And this should be it. I think we want to call this current here, and we want to import the component. This will be called progress, but it will be in the components folder. And I think we forgot to close this tag. And we should be able to see the question here, question 1 of 3, so this looks correct. And now let's create our second component. This one will be the question component. So let's add another component here. And I just want to show here some question. So for example, what is React? Let's say. And let's prepare this for the component. And let's create the new component here. Question.js. Okay, this one will be called question. This one also doesn't need any state. We will just show the question here. So we will show here the props dot question, and here we need to pass the props, and that's it. You should see the question here. That looks correct. And the next one will be the answer component. So let's create a new file here. We call answer.js. Open that file. Create some boilerplate code here. This one doesn't require any state. And here I want to create a button component. So this will be a button. The value for this button will be the letter. So in this case, we need to pass some props. This will be the A, B, or C, or D. Let's close this tag. And let's show here the answer, where we add this class name called leather, and we will show here the leather, the A, B, or C, or D. Let's close this tag. The answer next to that. So we'll be passing two props, the letter and the answer, to this component. Let's save this and let's add the component here. We pass the letter and we pass the answer component. Framework, let's say. Let's import that here. Answer. And forgot to close this tag. And I think we should see the answer. Yeah, we should see the button here. So now let's edit the app.css. I will not use any of this. So what I will do is to paste the CSS that I already have. So I don't want to spend a lot of time just typing CSS code. Basically, this is some simple style sheet. Here we are just adding a background color, setting a minimum height, just displaying this as a flex, wherever. Just some basic style sheet. So now we should see something better, I guess. Okay, so now let's so we don't only have one answer, we have like 4 answers in this case. So let's create a new another component so we can basically group the answers component. So instead of doing something like this, we will have just one component that groups all these answers. But I think we can add another style here. Let me see. Let's add another class here to this button. It will be called answer. So this now looks much better. Okay, so now let's create the answers component. So we will create a new component called answers. Some boilerplate code. We also don't need this state. We want to pass some props. I guess I need to add this to the snippet. And here we will move the code from the App.js. But since we have many different components, we need to enclose this in a fragment so we don't get that React error. And we need to import the answer component. And this looks correct. Save this. Answers, and let's show this in the App.js. So this will be answers, and answers is not defined. Okay, so I forgot to import the component here. And this should work now. Answers. Okay, so this one is at the same level, so we don't need to include the folder. And we could add some more answers here, so it will look like the final result. I will just keep that like that. Okay, so now let's add the button that goes below the answers, so we can basically submit the result, the answers to the form. This one is just a button, and we'll add some classes here for the styles. This will be a primary, and the label will be confirm and continue. Okay, this still doesn't work. Okay, so now I will copy and paste some questions that I already have here. This is basically an array of objects, and here we have one of the objects will be the question. So we have here an ID, a question, that would basically a string with the question, and 4 different answers that are basically our strings, and another property that is the right answer, that is also a string. So here we can define a new variable called question, and we will select one of the question or the objects based on the position. This is questions, and here instead of hard coding the value, we can pass the question string, and we now should see the question here. That looks correct. And now we can also pass that question property, that question object, sorry, to the answers component. That way we can have access to all the information, all the data in the question. I think this should be all lowercase, so we don't have any issue later with the comparison. Okay, so now instead of hard coding the question here, we can basically say props dot question dot answer a, and pretty much the same for these other questions. So let's copy and paste this here. This will be B. Let's paste all the strings here. C and D. Okay, so now let's check out the page. Yeah, you can see the data coming from the props. Okay, so now let's start adding some state to this application. The first thing we want to save is the current question that we want to show. So in this case will be a variable called current question, and this will be initialized with the 0 position. And here, instead of hard coding the first question, we want to show the new state variable, current question, and we are getting this error because we need to now use state here, import the useState hook, so we can use it here. And we are just getting this warning because we are not using yet this function. Another state variable we want to use is the current answer. So this is the answer that the user already selected. So this will be a string. It should be A, B, C, or D based on the button that the user clicks. And now we can pass that variable to the answers component, so we can basically set the selected question answer, sorry. So this will be current answer, and here we will have another property, or another prop called answer, called selected, and this will be the comparison between the props dot current answer and the position, the current component. For example, in this case will be the first one, the letter A, and we should do, oh sorry, we actually want to add another equal sign here, and let's add the other 4. And replace this here, B, C, and D. So with this prop, we can do now in the answer component is to set a CSS class that we can use to show the user what question is selected. So let's save this file. And now let's go to the answer component, and let's create a new variable so we can save the different classes, the different CSS classes. By default, you will always have the answer class, and if we have the selected option equals to true, the selected props, we should be pushing the other class, which is the selected class. And now here, instead of basically just hard coding the class, we should just print the classes here, or the array. That way we have the class name based on the selected prop. Okay, so now let's see. We now need to figure out how to change the state of the selected answer based on the interaction from the user when the user clicks on the button. So let's create a new function. This will be called handle click, and with this function we will basically manage the event of clicking on the button. So when the user clicks on the button, we want to set the current answer to the value of the button. So it will be e.target.value. And we have an issue here because this is not the right name for the function, for the setter function. It should be set current answer, and handle click should be passed to the button, to the answers component. So here we define another prop called handle click, and we pass handle click. Okay, so now we go to the answers component, and we also need to pass down that function to the answer component. So we'll create a new prop called handle click, and this will be handle click, and we do the same for the other components, and save. And finally we need to go to the answer component, and we need to add the onClick event, so we can basically pass the new function, the props.handleClick. And that way, when we click on the button, we should trigger the handle click. But it's not working. So let's see what we got here. Set current answer. Oh, it looks like we have a typo here. Current answer. And still not working. And there's another typo here. So this is current answer. Should be current answer. Okay. Let's see again. And it's finally working. The class is sticking, so we click here and we can see the option is highlighted. And now let's create another state variable. So we can save the answers. The user it's basically selecting over the quiz. This will be an empty array, so we can save all the different values here. And we also will use another state variable to save an error in case the user click next. Basically, it doesn't select any option. And now let's define a new function that we can use to handle the click event on the continue button. So it should be, we actually don't need the event variables, we just need the click. And here we define a new constant, should be answer, and here we will have an object with the question ID and the answer selected by the user. And after that, we should be pushing that to the answers array. And we set the answers to that variable, the array. So we change the state. And we set the current answer to an empty string because we already saved that answer. And then what we need to do is to go to the next question. So to do that, we need to check if the current question +1, because the first one is 0, is less than the length of the questions array. Then we set the current question to current question +1. And we return null here, so we don't continue. And we need to pass that function to the onClick event for this button. So let's do that. Should be next. And I'm getting a warning. Okay, no. So let's see that on the browser. We click one option, confirm, and we go to the next one. And you can notice the progress is still hard-coded. So let's fix that. This is now the questions.length, and this should be the current question, but we need to add the, actually it should be current question +1 maybe. Yeah, let's see that. Click here, second one. Okay, so this looks correct. And we need to handle another case. If the user doesn't select any option, basically you can continue, so that should not happen. So let's create another function called render error. So render error should check if there's no error in the state variable error. Should not do anything. But if there's an error, I would like to return the error. So this will be a div. We add the error here. And this should be a constant. And here below the question, I want to show the error. Okay. So now if I should check here if the user didn't select any answer. Then we set the error to please select an option. Okay, and we want to basically stop this function here so we don't continue. So let's check out that on the browser, and we can see here the error. And if we click here, we also should be basically remove the error message. So once the user clicks on an option, we should set the error to empty, to an empty string. And just continue and select an option, and it's working fine. Okay, so now let's show the results to the user. For that, let's create a new state variable called show results, and will be false by default. And with that variable here, we will check if show results is true. We show the results, and in the other case we show the same the quiz. So here we returned a new div. This will be the container, and with the results class, and inside this we create the results page. So now when we are at the last question, basically we want to show the results here. So we set the show results to true, and let's see that on the browser. go to the last question. And yeah, we get the results. So before showing the results here on this screen, let's create a new button for restarting the quiz. So let's copy and paste this code. This will call a new function called restart, and this will be restart as the value. And let's define that function here. Const restart restart, and in this function what we want to do is to reset all the state variables. So first one, it will be answers, then the current answer, then the current question. Current question is actually a number, and show results. Okay, so let's see that on the browser. And it's working. Okay, so now let's actually show the results to the user. So we create a new function called render results data, and in that function we will loop through the to the answers array, and we should return a new function and we should return here a new function with all the divs. So let's create this function here. First, let's find the question corresponding to the particular answer. So in this case we will use the map function, the find function, and when the question ID it's equal to the answer dot question ID, then we get that particular object, and we need to return here the div for this result. So let's create a new div here. We want to use the key, the question.id for the key, so we don't get the usual error from React. And here we just print the question from the question object, and excuse me, and now we show that results here in this results screen. Render results data, call the function here, and I want to enclose this in a UL. Okay, so let's check that on the browser. And looks like it's working. And finally, we need to show if the answer was right or not. So let's create another function here. This will be called render result mark, and I will be passing the question and the answer. And I will check if the question correct answer is the same as the answer from the user. Then we return the answer, that the answer is correct. So let's add our class name here. And if the answer is not correct, we should return another span. But in this case, you will say failed. Let's save this. And here, next to the question, I want to show the answer, the result. So render result mark, and we pass the question and the answer. Check out that on the browser. And it looks like it's working. Okay, so far we have managed our state using the useState hook. But now we will use the useReducer hook. This will implement a reducer function. A reducer function is just a function that takes a state and an action and return a new state based on that action. That's basically it. So in this case, we see we have all these different state variables are separate, but when we use a reducer, we should have just one object for the state. So let's start changing this. Let's create a new constant called initial state. And let's move all these different state variables here. Current question should be 0. Current answer should be an empty string. These answers will be an empty array. Show results is false by default. And the error should be an empty string. So you can now delete all this code here. Okay, so now let's define our reducer function. It will be called useReducer, and it will take the state and an action. And here inside we will have a switch, and based on the action.type, we will change the state. So for example, we say it here, set current answer, and based on that variable that we will define in a moment, we return a new state. So based on the current state, we will use the spread operator here, and we will only change the answer, the current answer value. So it will be the action.current answer. Some people like to call this payload, but I will call it the same as the state name, the state variable name. And here we need to define a constant for the action. As a good practice, it's recommended that you do that. So basically we define here this constant, and we assigned the string as the value. So if you have used Redux before, this should look familiar to you. I'm getting a warning here. Okay, yeah, I didn't set a default. Usually for the default, we just return the state. Okay. Okay, so now that we have our reducer function, we should be able to use the dispatch function to trigger different actions. But first, let's fix our application, because here we have all these different variables that are basically not existent anymore because the state now is in an object. So what we can do here is to destructure the state. We have the current question from the state. We have the current answer. We have the answers, show results, and the error. And all these come from the state. So in this moment, I think the app should be working, but it's not, because all these different functions, the setter functions that came with the useState hook, are undefined. So I guess we will need to start migrating those setters to the useReducer, to the reducer function. Okay, so the first one we have is the set current answer. So let's see, set current answer is called here. So now we can use the dispatch function here, and the dispatch function takes an object with a type that will be set current answer, and the payload, or the value that we want to change, will be answer. And in this case, we want to set it to an empty string. Same here. Let me find the other one. Let's just copy and paste this here. And here. In this case, we want to copy this code from here and delete these two lines. Let's actually define all the different actions for this application. The other one is set current question. Set current question. The other one is set error. Set error. We also have set show results. And the last one will be set answers. And now that we have the constants, we can start creating all these different cases. This could be set question, set current question. And the set current question will basically change the question variable. Question here. Let's do another one for the error. This will be error. The other one will be set show results. Set show results. And this will be show results. And show results. And finally, set answers. And this will change the answers value. Okay, so I believe now we have all the different actions. So let's start changing all the setters here. So this one will be set error here. Error will be empty. Let's find another one. Okay, so here actually we don't need to call the dispatch function for each state change. When you see all these setters in sequence or sequentially, it's a good sign that you can use a reducer function, because in this case, with just one dispatch call, we can update all the different values for the state. So instead of doing all this, we can create a new type called reset quiz, for example. And we don't need to pass any payload actually. And in this new action, we can set all these different state variables. So let's do that here. This will be set quiz array. Current question should be 0. Current answer should be an empty string. Show results should be false. And the error should be an empty string. And we are getting a warning here because we haven't defined this constant here. So let's do that here. So now we can continue migrating all these setters to the dispatch calls. This one will be set answers, and here we can actually just leave it like that. And what else? Set current question here. Set current question. This will be current question +1. There's another one here for the error. Set error here, and the error will be the one that we have here. And let's Let's save this. Let's find another one. Set show results. Set show results should be false, or should be true, because we want to show the results. And what else? Set answers, nothing. Set question. Let's check out the browser actually. Whoop. It looks like this is working. I click on an option and it's working. I can go to the next one and I can get the results and I can restart the app. So it looks like all the different actions are now using the useReducer. So that's great. Okay, so now that we have our dispatch function, instead of passing the callback function here, we could pass the dispatch function here to the answers component, and from here to the answer component. If I can spell it right, dispatch should be dispatch, and let's copy this to here, 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 and delete these lines. And now the answer component should be able to access the dispatch function. So now let's move the handle click function to the answer component. And on click, we can use the props dispatch. And here we called handle click. We have a type that is not defined. As a good practice, we should create a new file for the different types. So let's do that. Let's create a new folder here, called reducers and types here. Let's open that file and let's move all the different constants defined here. And we have to import all those different actions here. Set answers, set current question, set current answer, set error, set show results, and reset quiz. That will come from the reducers types.js, and that should fix the app.js. And we need to do something similar on the answered component. But here we will only need these two, set current answer and set error, and this should fix the error here. and we can't resolve types, and I know why. That's because we are in the components folder. So this should fix it. Okay, so now let's confirm everything's working, and it looks like it's not working. Let's check the console, and we got a lot of errors here. And actually I think we forgot to I forgot to add the export here, and that's the only way that the other components can import that. So let's see. Okay, now it seems to be working, and seems to be fine now. Another thing we can do is to move the reducer function to a separate file. So let's create a new file here in the reducers. It will be called useReducer. And here we should import all these different types. And move this function here. And finally export that function. But this will be at the same level, and now we need to import that function from here. So it will be import useReducer from reducers useReducer, and it should work. And it's working. Okay, so now let's implement the useContext hook. This hook is useful if we don't want to pass down all these props from one component to another. Sometimes you have a very long tree of components, so you need to keep passing down these props from one component to another, even if you don't use the data in a particular child component. You have to pass it to another and to another. So context solves that issue. So we could basically just delete all these props here and access the values from the component directly. Let's start by creating the context. We will create a new folder here. It will be called context, and the file will be useContext. And here we need to import the createContext function from React, and create our context with that function. And export that so we can access that from the different components. Okay, so now that we have this file, we can go back to the App.js, and here we can import that context, context useContext. Okay, so now what we need to do is to wrap this whole code in this quiz context. We do that by doing this quiz context.provider, and here we put the values that we want to pass to all the components. In this case, I will want to pass the state and the dispatch function. Let's close this one here. Oh, sorry, it should be provider. Okay, now we are passing this object with these two values. We could be passing anything here, basically. Some people say that we should only pass the dispatch function and create a different context for the state, because it's very expensive to re-render when the state changes. But so far for this app, I haven't seen any performance issue. I even checked with the profiler. It's basically something that you need to try and check if you have a component that is super expensive, like you do some crazy calculations or things like that. But re-renders in React are very cheap usually. Now let's go to the answers component and import the quiz context from here. This should be context, and now we can access those values from the component. This context here. And we need to import the useContext hook. useContext. And as you can see here, the useContext hook returns the two values. So now we can basically use them inside the component. So here we can, as we get the state, we can destructure that state here. So let's use the structuring so we can get the current answer. We won't be using props here now. I want to delete the dot. Okay, so we also need the question. But I believe we need to pass the whole questions array. So let's go to the App.js file, and in here let's add the questions to the state, and let's move this code from here to the top. So now we have the questions in the state, and I believe now we can access that from here. And get the question that we want. I think we could put the current question object in the state. That probably could be a more elegant solution, but this is working, so I won't change that. Now we can get the questions and the current question here, and I need the current question here, and got an error. because okay, so I actually replaced the wrong parenthesis here, and it should work now. Quiz context is not defined. Yeah, because we are in the components folder. Answer, no, same error. Quiz context is mixed spell. Now it should work. Let's see. So awesome, it's working. And since we are not using the props now, we can actually delete this part here, and this should be still working. Okay, and we can do the same for the other components. So let's update the question component. So we want to get the same import here, and probably this same code. We don't want the current question, sorry, current answer, but we want the questions and the current questions. And we actually don't need the dispatch function here, so we can't remove that part. We don't need these props here and here, and useContext is not imported. And this should work. React child. And here we actually don't want to print the whole object, just the string with the question. That was the error. Okay. Still working. So now we can remove this app here, this prop here, and this should be working. Yeah, cool. And that's it for this video. If this was useful, please leave a like and consider subscribing if you want to watch more videos like this. Thanks for watching. Bye.